Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. The UN Security Council met on Saturday to vote on a draft resolution backing an Arab call for President Bashar al-Assad to give up power. But Russia, Syria's last remaining ally in the region, has warned that the resolution doesn't demand enough of the groups opposing Assad's government. Moscow has also made it clear that any transfer of power must be a decision made from within and nothing less. Despite meeting with the US Secretary of State in Munich earlier to discuss the reservations, Russia has warned that failure to amend the resolution accordingly will be met with a veto. The announcement comes as Sergei Lavrov and Foreign Intelligence Services Chief Mikhail Fradkov prepare to travel to Syria on Tuesday to meet President Assad. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests today. From New York, Ambassador Richard Murphy, who served as US Ambassador to Syria in 1974. From Beirut, Robert Fisk, author of numerous books on the Middle East and a veteran foreign correspondent for the Independent newspaper. And from Moscow, Ivan Safranchuck, political analyst and Deputy Director of the Institute of Contemporary International Studies. Ivan, let's start with you. Help us, if you can, understand Moscow's misgivings here. Why would it veto any resolution that it considered to be unacceptable? What is unacceptable as far as Moscow is concerned? What are they most concerned about?
Moscow is most concerned about stability in the region of the Middle East, and Moscow is extremely concerned with keeping the decisions of the international community in accordance with international law. And that's why whatever transfer of power is considered, that should go through legitimate procedures. And the UN Security Council is not a world government to decide who should be in what office. And also we should keep in mind that Middle East is quite an unstable region. And what we need is rule of law and enforcement of law rather than over-response to the demands of street. There are legal procedures how to go on with political reform in Syria, and there are legal procedures how to transfer power. So the pressure from the point of view of Moscow should be on President Assad to continue political reforms and to implement real political reforms, and the pressure on the so-called opposition should be to engage in the political dialogue with the official authorities. And that is the only way out of the crisis if we do not want the continuation of civil war and destabilization of the whole region.
Richard Murphy, isn't there a danger that any resulting resolution following this tortuous process will be so watered down for the sake of international unity as to be virtually meaningless?
Not meaningless. I was reading a comment by one of the opposition leaders that any resolution is better than no resolution and better than a vetoed resolution. It would constitute a unity of opinion, even though it's called watered down, lacking in the specifics that the Arab League had sought at the beginning. It will have a meaning in Syria. It will give a hope. There can be a political process and progress on the part of the opposition, give them hope, and it will constitute a pressure on the regime to have Moscow joining in what would be its first serious criticism of the regime.
Robert Fisk, it's looking less and less likely that the Arab League will get the strong UN response that it wanted, at least at the moment that we're having this conversation. Nabil El-Arabi insists, though, that it doesn't matter, that even a weaker resolution will still help. Will it?
Well, you know, we're always being told that UN resolutions are being watered down. They're never made tougher. They always get watered down, don't they? You know, I think the UN resolution doesn't matter. What does matter is what Mr. Lavrov is going to say to Mr. Assad on Tuesday. Is he going to say, as a lot of people here in Beirut suspect, it's time to go, we can get you out now, but if you stay longer, we may not be able to help you? Or is he merely going to try and find out who the opposition are? Because all the countries in this region are trying to find out who is the opposition, who would take over if the Assad regime went. he's clinging on. It's a tough regime in Syria. I don't think it's about to collapse. As long as they've got Damascus and Aleppo, they'll be okay to hang on. But what is Lavrov going to say? That's what maybe Richard and our colleague in Moscow have a few ideas, but I think that the Lavrov meeting, I would love to be a fly on the wall, even a big fly.
Yeah, wouldn't we all? Ivan, I'm interested to know, is there something more to Moscow's position? Is there perhaps at least an ear to a determination to prevent a repeat of what actually happened in Libya? Did the UN resolution that allowed foreign intervention in Libya perhaps leave Russia feeling so sidelined and undermined and without influence that it's determined that that's not going to happen again?
You're right. Russia is under the immediate impression of their resolution of the Libyan crisis, if we can call what happened in Libya exactly the resolution of the crisis. We have continuing crisis rather than its resolution in Libya, and Russia is under very, very strong negative impression from the Libyan experience. And that is not only Libyan experience. We can take also experiences of the 90s and early 2000 years over former Yugoslavia, over Iraq, over Iran, when Russia was agreeing to some resolutions, and then there were very different interpretations of the resolution. And Russia was joining the international community with some texts, and then Russia was engaged in a war over interpretations. And sometimes Russia was losing this war over interpretations. And very oftenly, UN Security Council resolutions were interpreted extremely widely. And I don't think that Russia wants to go again into this war over interpretations. Russia wants to have very detailed and very clear-cut text of the resolution so that there is real common understanding over the text rather than for the war of interpretations.
Ivan, Hillary Clinton said this week that the decision ought to be simple. She said, are you on the side of the Syrian people or on the side of a brutal dictatorial regime? I mean, you're saying that Moscow is unable to see it in such simple terms. There
is an extreme oversimplification of the situation in Libya and in Syria. And this is the simplification which goes us to nowhere. If you know all the leaders of the Syrian opposition, so-called opposition, if you know who is going to come to power, what is Syrian people? What is this voice of streets? If you say that you do not matter who comes to power in these countries, if you say that you do not matter about the future of Israel, if you do not matter about the human rights in this region, about education for children, about rights for women, then yes, you can say let whoever takes the power. So if you do not care about instability, very possible instability in the region, then you can take this position. If you do care, then you should engage in very, very nuanced and maybe tough political process, which may result in the end in the transfer of power. But that should be controlled transfer of power rather than civil war and chaos, which may have very negative consequences for neighboring countries, including Israel and Turkey.
Robert Fisk, is civil war in Syria unavoidable?
I think at the moment we are seeing a real insurgency in Syria. We are seeing the city of Homs, effectively outside government control. There are rumors here that some of the military, by the way, are not being given any shells for their tanks in case they defect. A very serious matter if that turns out to be true. I think we are seeing an increasing emergence in Syria of a hostile population, not just with the killing of pro-government soldiers, but the killing of various members of different communities in Homs. I know, for example, personally someone whose friend lost their grandfather, 85 years old, shot dead by a sniper 2 nights ago. I know of a man whose very good friend was killed on his doorstep, apparently because he gave water to some soldiers. So these individual acts are brutal, cruel, and I don't think it's just one side carrying them out. Brutal regime, we would always say that about Assad, but I think there's some pretty brutal people among the opposition too, and that of course is one question that Mr. Lavrov will want to know. Who is the opposition that he might have to deal with if indeed Assad does one day go?
Ambassador Murphy, given the brutality what's going on in Syria at the moment, how will a resolution, if it's passed, help the people of Syria, and what happens if a resolution isn't passed? What will that mean for the situation in Syria?
It's easier to answer your second question. If there is no resolution, I think there will be a drop in the level of hope that there can be a political solution, and it will lead to more militancy on the part of the population, more taking up of arms, and everyone is right to be concerned about who, if there will be a replacement for President Assad, what will this opposition consist of? We honestly can't know. But what we can see is that the passage of time itself is extremely damaging to the possibilities of a future stability and understanding within Syria. The regime appears still to be in a time warp, believing that Syria is somehow distinct from the rest of the Arab world, that its young people are being perverted by foreign inspiration, thugs and assassins from the ranks of imperialists and Zionists, etc. It's been a refrain from the very first day last year of the regime against its critics. But those critics are going to be further radicalized and more difficult to come together with representatives of the regime when that day is finally reached.
All right, gentlemen, we'll pause there for just a moment. We'll come back to our discussion in a few moments. But this UN meeting comes as more than 200 people were killed in the Syrian city of Homs, making it the deadliest single attack since the uprising began almost a year ago. Residents said that security forces started shelling the Khalidiyya neighborhood in the evening, destroying 36 homes. The Syrian government denied the attack, blaming terrorists who they claim are funded by foreign powers. Al Jazeera's Nicole Johnston reports.
Wounded men take shelter in a mosque in the Khalidiyya area of Homs. The dead are here too. Syrian activists say the hospitals are overwhelmed with the victims of intense fighting between the opposition and government troops.
I am at the front of the civilian hospital in Homs. We are trying to move some of the injured people to a private hospital because there isn't enough medical support. There is a lack of blood, oxygen and medicines and medical staff and first aid. We are moving the people, but there is danger in the streets. But we have no choice. The hospital is overcrowded, and we opened the mosque next to it to provide medical care.
Witnesses say the city is under constant bombardment. Hundreds of people have been killed. The fighting raged throughout the night. Buildings were ablaze, and there are reports mosques were hit. All these videos have been filmed by activists and uploaded on YouTube. But Al Jazeera can't verify their authenticity. And it seems the fighting is spreading.
The nearest villages of Homs, they are also being bombed, all with mortar weapons and heavy weapons. Now not able to protect people there because, I mean, there are no soldiers in the streets. They are just bombing from the bases.
However, Syrian state television sees the battle very differently. It reports that the army is trying to protect people in Homs from armed gangs roaming the streets to kidnap people. The government also says many of those killed in the mortar shelling were hostages taken by the Free Syrian Army. The United Nations Security Council meets later and is expected to vote on a resolution condemning the violence in Syria. There has been intense international pressure on Russia not to use its veto at the Security Council. But these diplomatic negotiations are doing nothing to stop dozens of people from dying in Syria. Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's get back to our guests. Ambassador Richard Murphy in New York, Robert Fisk in Beirut, and Ivan Safranchuck in Moscow. Robert Fisk, Bashar al-Assad has become the bogeyman, the tyrant, the oppressive dictator. I wonder, To what extent do you think he's actually pulling the strings in Damascus? Do you think that he truly believes that the uprising is the work of, as we heard there, terrorists or of foreign meddling?
Well, I was with the leader of one of the Gulf states not that long ago, and he talks to President Assad, and he assured me that Assad is taking all these decisions himself, not living in a time warp. I mean, he may be, but he doesn't think he is. What's oddly enough happened is that, you know, when all this started months ago, nobody believed there was an armed opposition. Now there clearly is an armed opposition. So in a strange way, the government's original statements have become true after several months of brutality. And I would add, again, that the brutality is on both sides. This is a regime in Syria that's going to fight hard to cling on, as Mr. Lavrov will no doubt be told. But there clearly are hundreds and hundreds of deserters now. A Syrian friend of mine suggested 2,000. The Free Syria Army, quote unquote, say many more, of course. But I think we're probably getting to a point in Syria now where things are falling out of control, that the military simply cannot go and kill so many people as it was able to in the past. It is interesting to note, by the way, that the government would not have wanted so many dead in Homs today when Lavrov is about to go to Damascus and the UN is debating Syria. So there may have been some soldiers taken hostage, as the government says. That does not mean that the army are being kind to anyone. The situation in Syria is slipping out of control in the countryside, but it's still under control in Damascus and Aleppo, and that's the important thing to remember.
Ivan, what do you think Moscow makes of the regime's refusal, it appears, to accept the reality of what's happening on the ground, at least publicly? What do you think Sergei Lavrov will hear in Damascus next week, and what will he be telling Bashar al-Assad?
First of all, I would fully agree that the situation in the countryside of Syria has got out of control, and that is very dangerous. I would also fully agree that brutality on both sides, on the official side and on the so-called opposition side, is unacceptable, and unfortunately the brutality is growing, and that is actually the center of gravity over which the discussion should develop. We should stop this brutality, and all efforts of the international community should be targeted at this. I would not agree that President Assad is out of reality in his mind and that he does not understand what is going on in the country. I think he does understand, and he's trying to take the situation under control. Maybe sometimes his efforts in this way are not really well thought, and maybe even further are not well implemented. However, I would draw your attention to the following. Would you say that it is in the interest of President Assad and the official authorities of Syria to have extra violence on the eve of the UN Security Council resolution? They are so much criticized for being brutal and violent. Do you think it is in their interest to be even more brutal and violent, or at least to look in that way when the resolution is discussed and when they are so much under criticism? I don't think it is in their interest, and that's why I would not fully dismiss the statements of the official authorities that there are some provocations which go on and which provoke brutalities, because from my point of view, it is fully in their interest exactly to avoid violence when a resolution is under discussion. However, each time we have a resolution coming to voting, we have extra violence. I can't think that the regime is so unwise that they are acting against their interests.
Richard Murphy, to what extent do you think that Moscow's policy on Syria is influenced by by trade. And how much does the political future of Vladimir Putin play into this? Russia can hardly be seen to be pushing for the removal of head of state, at least in a UN resolution, when it's just about to implement the plan that will see Mr. Putin come back to power as president.
Well, there have been a whole series of allegations, interpretations of the Russian position, ranging from the vital strategic interest that it has in Tartus as a naval base in the Mediterranean, in Syria as an arms market. Well, Syria is not a great arms market. It accepts the arms, but it has had trouble paying for them. And I doubt that Russian strategy is pinned to the presence in Tartus. What Russians have commented privately is that the United States and many other countries do not understand the dangers of extremist Islam coming to power in these Middle Eastern countries, as if Russia is better briefed or has a better understanding, perhaps because of its own difficulties within Russia, with Chechnya, for instance. I don't know. I don't know what is motivating Mr. Putin to say that the whole system, the whole problem should be worked out face to face between the regime and the opposition. It's a good idea, and we certainly have encouraged dialogue, but the regime is not really responding, or hasn't responded to that pressure for the last 11 months. Now, what is going to bring a real dialogue about? Will the opposition agree to deal with President Assad? They have said no, they will do nothing as long as he remains as president. That's something Mr. Lavrov can inquire about. But on the other hand, from the regime standpoint, I'm sure that they see if Mr. Assad steps aside, that will involve a slippery slope for many others in the regime, and that's why they're digging their heels in on that issue.
A final thought from Robert Fisk. Robert, I wonder where Iran fits in to all of this. So does Iran fit into all of this, with the Arab League pushing for this UN Security Council resolution? The expanding influence of Iran, with Syria's help, must be of great concern to the Sunni-dominated governments of the region.
Well, I'll tell you my answer to that. I suspect that Lavrov might continue his journey on to Tehran if he doesn't get what he wants in Damascus, on the basis that Iran is about the only country that's on speaking terms with the Syrian regime. There's no other Arab states are going to be on the phone to Assad. So it may well be that Lavrov tries to bring Iran in. Whether Iran will want to be involved is a completely different matter. It does take the view that Syria is a modern country, that these are indeed terrorists, quote unquote. It does not see this as a revolution, which it clearly is. I think Iran is going to be the big factor that Mr. Lavrov is going to be thinking about.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Murphy?
Well, I do. I don't think that Mr. Lavrov will get much results in dealing with Iran at this point in time. I hope that the influence he can bring to bear in Damascus will be decisive, but we can't project that.
One final thought from Ivan in Moscow. Do you agree with what you've heard there? Keep your answer very brief if you can, please, Ivan.
I would agree if what is said means that there is regional competition for power, and this regional competition for power between some regional big countries is very tough, and unfortunately they are making this war for power through proxies rather than through direct dialogue. And we can't do anything right now except we can't do anything about it right now except to try to keep it under international law.
Gentlemen, there we must leave it. Many thanks indeed to our guests for joining us in New York. Richard Murphy, in Beirut, Robert Fisk, and Ivan Safranchuck in Moscow. And thank you very much indeed for watching. If you want to catch the show again online, just go to our website, al-jazeera.com, and do join us again next week for more Inside Syria. From me, Adrian Finnegan. Bye for now.